Y ahora vamos a dar paso a, a dos ponentes que nos van a hablar sobre cómo se puede utilizar para la toma de decisiones de planeamiento los mapas de oportunidades de servicios ecosistémicos. Ellos son Krista Patrick y Mike Hodgkinson. Krista Patrick es coordinador de Capital Natural del Condado de Gran Manchester. Lleva más de 25 años de experiencia como planificador medioambiental. Se incorporó a la Autoridad Combinada de Gran Manchester. Desde entonces, los proyectos en los que trabaja actualmente incluyen el desarrollo de un fondo de medio ambiente para el condado, la consecución de la ganancia de la biodiversidad y las prioridades del entorno natural establecidas en su plan medioambiental quinquenal y la promoción del trabajo que se está llevando a cabo en todo Gran Manchester para gestionar el entorno natural como parte de una campaña de comunicación coordinada. Mike Hodgkinson, que participa en la ponencia que van a realizar ya con los ejemplos prácticos de aplicación. Es director de TEP, de Environment Partnership, una alianza medioambiental. Bueno, es el nombre realmente de la consultora para que él trabaja. Es graduado en planificación y gestión del paisaje. Ha venido trabajando desde hace más de 20 años en el ámbito del medio ambiente, el paisaje y los sistemas de información geográfica, de los cuales es especialista. Tiene amplios conocimientos en el análisis espacial y en el desarrollo de sistemas aplicados sobre los espacios y la infraestructura verde, capital natural y servicios ecosistémicos. Es un profesional con amplia experiencia en el desarrollo y la gestión de soluciones tecnológicas de software relacionadas con estas áreas. Por último, podemos señalar que Mike Hodgkinson gestiona proyectos de varios sistemas nacionales de registro topográfico y para nosotros son una referencia. O sea que le damos la bienvenida, gracias.
Para las personas que están online y quieran escuchar las ponencias en español, tienen que pinchar en el icono del mundo y quieren escuchar, sí, las de inglés en español, tienen que pinchar en el icono del mundo e indicar que quieren escucharlas en español.
Hello, everyone. Shall I start speaking now?
Hello.
Hello. So shall I share my slides for you all? I think you've just provided an introduction to us. So shall share my slides. Hold on. There we go. And let's just put it on that. Have those come out of the main slides? Brilliant. Okay, right. So thank you everyone for your time today to present on the work that we've been delivering in Greater Manchester using a range of natural capital tools, including ecosystem services, opportunity mapping, and natural capital accounts. So I'm joined by my colleague here, Mike Hodgkinson from TEP. You want to say a couple of words, Mike?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you very much for the invite today. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to move on with the slides. But it's important just to note in terms of the tools that we've got here, what we wanted to do is just give you an overview of the tools that we've developed, but also to actually kind of show how we've used them in practice, and particularly in terms of helping to inform decision making in a number of different ways. So we've got some slides coming up that we've got over the next 45 minutes that hopefully will provide a good example of how we've been using these tools in Greater Manchester. So there are our details here. I'm Natural Capital Coordinator at GMCA, and Mike's head of all things GIS at TEP. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, that covers everything. Yeah. Anything spatial and data related, that's me.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to go into the first slide here. So in Greater Manchester, we have been, with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, which is the kind of we have 10 local authorities in Greater Manchester. We're the overarching kind of strategic authority for Greater Manchester, and we have the Greater Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham, but we work very closely with our 10 local authorities and partners. And so through our kind of collaboration, we've been using a variety of natural capital tools to inform policies, decision-making and developments. So we're going to provide, some explanation of how we've used them, what we've produced, who's been using them, and some important key learning from our experience to date. So if you're not familiar with Greater Manchester, we're on the left map there in the UK. We're that red area up in the northwest of England. It covers 493 square miles, comprising of 10 local authorities and home to around 2.8 million people. So quite a dense area in terms of population. But actually, in terms of that, people might think that Greater Manchester is very, very built up and urban, but actually 53% of our area is urban. So we also have a lot of green area. We have a lot of wildlife and natural habitats, including wooded valleys, moorlands, reed beds, mature woodlands, scrubland, mosslands, river valleys, and urban parks. So quite a diverse range of uses in our area. But you can see on the right-hand map, that's the 10 local authorities that we have in Greater Manchester. And they all vary in terms of size and population and different types of characteristics in terms of their makeup. So as with many kind of towns and cities across Europe, we face major environmental challenges that threaten the future health and prosperity of the city region. And, there are dangerous levels of pollution, air pollution, degrading priority habitats, and increasing risks from climate change, whether or not that's flooding, but also overheating, and interestingly, fires, particularly in terms of our upland moorland areas, where we're seeing a lot more fires during periods of drought, which, again, contribute to air pollution, but also release of chemicals from our previous industrial age, where all the pollutants that have come from our previous industrial legacy have been absorbed by the uplands, but when they set fire to them and when we put water onto them, those chemicals come out. So if we don't manage all these risks and all these impacts, whether that's on land, water, our biodiversity, but also our investment, where's that money going to come to actually help to deliver a lot of these projects, and how do we engage people? If we don't manage this properly, then we might see a lot more grey infrastructure rather than green infrastructure, and actually decreased quantities of green and blue infrastructure, or decreased quality of our green and blue infrastructure. So, we really do need to try and address these challenges in terms of how we protect, maintain, and enhance our natural environment. And obviously this week we have COP16. So, it's a really, really important time to kind of look at how we value our natural environment. And there was a quote on a radio show today, which, says that, everyone has lots of priorities and pressures, and therefore nature comes down the priority list. But if we don't continue to make sure that nature is embedded in all our decision making, then that affects society, our economy, and ultimately our existence. So we need to ensure that nature is integral to our decision making. So we're taking action, Greater Manchester's taking action to address these challenges. And what we've done is we produced a 5-year environment plan in 2019. And that was launched then as part of our Mayor's Green Summit. We have a Green Summit every year. I think we're on our 7th or 8th Green Summit this year, which is being held in December. And we have about 1,000 people that come to that Green Summit to hear about all the progress that's being made, but also to discuss the challenges in terms of meeting the ambitious targets that are in our 5-year environment plan. And the key target you can see from that picture on the left is that we've set an ambitious target to be carbon neutral by 2038. And that carbon neutrality target is higher and more ambitious than our government's target. So we have some really ambitious targets there, and we really do need to deliver a number of urgent actions to get there. We're in the process of updating our 5-year environment plan, and that will be launched at our next Mayor's Green Summit in December. But the natural environment plays a key role in our 5-year environment plan, alongside carbon, alongside air quality, alongside sustainable consumption and production, particularly waste and reuse of materials. And a lot of the work that we've been doing around the natural environment in terms of using natural capital tools has helped to really shape the priorities in the 5-year environment plan to ensure that actually they're on the same level as carbon, as sustainable consumption, production, as air quality. And, you know, nature has also been at the heart of our Greater Manchester strategy, where we have a new strategy, which is the aim is to create a greener, fairer, and more prosperous city region, which means that everyone should have a fair access to green space, and particularly from COVID, that actually there are people in Greater Manchester that don't have good access to good quality green space. So what we're trying to do is, you know, kind of provide grants to communities to bring forward improving their existing green space, or even providing new ones. And also we are producing a local nature recovery strategy, which is our new strategy document setting out our strategic priorities for nature. It sets out the core areas where we should be protecting nature, but also the opportunity areas where we want to provide bigger, better, and more joined up areas for nature, and actually start, you know, kind of encouraging more corridors across Greater Manchester, and ensuring that if there is a development that is coming forward, a new housing development, that it doesn't block a corridor, that actually it helps to either create a new corridor or maintain an existing corridor, because the corridors and the bigger, better joined up spaces in Greater Manchester is absolutely essential to have a nature network in Greater Manchester. And we're one of 48 areas in the country producing local nature recovery strategies, which will all form a jigsaw in terms of the whole of the United Kingdom and its nature network. So in terms of where we're up to with our natural capital journey, I wanted to start with just going back to 2016, when we were designated as one of 4 pioneer areas in the country. So we were the urban pioneer, there was a landscape pioneer, there was there was a water pioneer, and then there was a coastal pioneer. But in the urban pioneer, we were trying to look at new ways of developing and testing natural capital accounts to inform the government's 25-year environment plan. And as part of that, we developed new models to manage and improve our environment. So whilst the urban pioneer has finished, and you know, you can see this timeline goes up to 2021, 22, we've continued to build on this work and, you know, to deliver our ambitions for the environment. So I think how this all fits together is really key. So you can see on this journey that we've started off with the evidence on the left-hand side, and that evidence in terms of our natural capital accounts and our ecosystem services mapping has helped to engage with politicians and stakeholders about the value of our natural environment. And that's really important because we need that evidence to then kind of say, well, actually, the natural environment provides a lot of value to people. And from understanding that value, we can start talking to people about how they benefit from nature and their interest in that, in terms of ensuring that we continue to protect, maintain, and enhance that nature. So building on from that evidence base, we fed that into the 5-year environment plan and the Mayor's Green Summit. But then actually we went on to producing a natural capital investment plan, because producing natural capital tools like ecosystem services, opportunity mapping, and natural capital accounts has helped us to understand who benefits from nature and actually who is prepared to pay for nature. So, you know, we have a funding gap that the government and local government, such as ourselves, can help fund, you know, some nature projects, but we can't fund everything that is required to deliver our ambitious targets in Greater Manchester, but also the government's ambitious targets. So therefore, we need to look at bringing in public and private sector investment into nature. And so our natural capital investment plan looked at the different innovative finance models that we could use to bring in private finance. And on the back of that, we then set up a GM Environment Fund, which has been really, really successful. The Mayor has put in just over £3 million over the past couple of years for green spaces projects. And we're also looking at how we can start building, you know, kind of private sector investment as well. So, you know, our journey hasn't stopped, and we continue to build on the work that we did back in 2016 and learn from that as well. So I mentioned the government's Urban Pioneer project back in 2016. That ran for 2 years up to 2018. And as part of that, you know, developing those new models, what we wanted to do was obviously understand how all this fits together, how we can develop the evidence base, how we can deliver biodiversity net gain, how we can invest, but also have demonstrator projects that actually show the benefits of taking a natural capital approach, but also how do we communicate and engage and influence people as well. So that was really important. So the first start of that was to understand what we've got and actually what its value is and what the benefits are to people in Greater Manchester. So a key priority at the start of the Urban Pioneer project was the development of a set of natural capital accounts and the ecosystem services maps. And what we wanted to do was measure those benefits that are provided by our natural assets, our natural environment, to businesses, public services and residents. And we've done this so that we can know what we currently have, but also we can monitor those assets over time and look at the improvement or perhaps, you know, the decline in the condition of those assets. So this provides decision makers at all levels with the tools and evidence to help them make more informed, joined up decisions. And it's presented in a way that the benefits can be clearly communicated to a number of different sectors in a language they understand. So since we've had that range of natural capital tools developed, we've used them in different ways. But I wanted just to show you here. So we've got a small selection of the valuations on our screen here from back in 2019. And so on air quality, what we've got is air quality regulation, and vegetation improves air quality, which prevents hospital admissions each year, but also helps to avoid life years lost. Carbon sequestration, we're sequestering 50,000 tons of carbon out of the atmosphere each year by our woodlands and our peatlands. And then in terms of physical activity, 135,000 people use our green spaces, our parks, to meet their physical activity guidelines. And that kind of meets a number of our kind of guidelines around people's life years. And we can use those figures to communicate with our health colleagues, but also around mental health. 1 million people receive mental health benefits by accessing green spaces and giving a reduction in the kind of, obviously, the decrease or actually increase in their health. But the key thing here is that if we don't continue to protect, maintain, and improve our natural environment, these benefits are lost. And actually, these benefits are a cost for society. If we don't continue to protect and maintain our green spaces, our parks, then we lose £56 million worth of physical activity benefits. We lose 264 benefits to mental health, or even £372 million worth of income from people spending money in green spaces through parking costs, through cafes, and things that people spend when they go out to our natural environment. And again, there's a cost to society. If we don't protect these areas, then there's a cost in terms of increased admissions to hospital, kind of people's health deteriorating, and that has an impact on our health services and our services of our public services. So that's how we present and use these natural capital accounts, and they're really important. We feel that these high-level accounts have been really, really important, even just to help inform these very high-level messages for politicians. So I think I'm going to hand over now to Mike, who's going to take you through the journey, really, of the ecosystem services mapping tool. And this is work that we felt was really important to commission to actually build up these ecosystem services tools and how we're using them in practice. So over to you, Mike.
Brilliant. Thanks, Krista. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit around the opportunity mapping tool. I'm going to talk about how we developed it, how we then went about promoting it to stakeholders, and then just talking through finally just some typical use cases that we found to give you a bit of a flavor of how these tools can actually be used in the real world. So I guess where to start with was the challenge with this. So how do we take all that vision that Krista's talked through and what Greater Manchester was trying to achieve? How do we take that and build it and put it into a tool that people can use and learn from and be applicable? So our starting point really was looking at what the challenge was going to be. So I guess the first point is looking at what previous studies and learning had taken place. It's really important when building either spatial tools or assessing something that you begin to understand what's been done previously. What can you learn from that? What data's out there that you can use to build into the product that we want to create? It was also clear that we needed to be consistent across Greater Manchester. So Krista showed that slide at the beginning showing the 10 authorities and the area that Greater Manchester covers. To put that in a kind of spatial perspective, that's over 7 million individual land parcels across Greater Manchester. So what our challenge was, how do we develop a system and a process that can look at each one of those individual land parcels and assess them in a consistent way? We understood the ecosystem services that we needed to assess, but we also wanted to bring a new flavor to this. We wanted to be able to embrace the data that was out there, and importantly, the technology as well. What we didn't want to generate was hundreds of pages of a report that someone would have to read through and trying to understand. What we wanted to do was develop a nice tool that used technology, web mapping, and data analysis. And so at the heart of everything was about the usability and functionality. You shouldn't need to be a GIS specialist to be able to use this tool. You shouldn't be able to be an IT specialist to use this tool. It should be available to everyone, and it should be able to translate all of that data across all those millions of land parcels and be able to allow the user to interpret the information they needed. Importantly as well is that it had to be replicatable and repeatable. So what we put a lot of effort to within this tool was to write quite a detailed methodology that sits behind the tool. So if any organizations or any countries want to take that method and learn from it and apply the same process, they can do that. The tool's not locked away to anyone in particular. So that was our challenge. On the right-hand side of this slide, it just shows the methodology that we followed. The project fell into two broad phases. So phase one was all about initially looking at the river valleys, so the land surrounding the water bodies in Greater Manchester. then looking at the habitat typology, and this was really critical. So if you're looking to identify how we can improve ecosystem services, the first building block of that is understanding what habitats there is there now. So that's quite easy on a small area. You can go outside, you can look, you can maybe look at some data, some aerial imagery, and begin to understand. But how do we do that across the whole of Greater Manchester to make sure we know exactly what habitats are there now? We then developed a method to assess the ecosystem services, which we can talk about shortly. That fed into the natural capital accounts, and then we developed this tool. The second phase of the project, which I'll talk about later, is then taking that information, beginning to understand how we can prioritize different types of works and projects that can use this tool. How can we share it with stakeholders? And ultimately, how can we encourage that investment, like Krista mentioned there? An awful lot of money is required. So how can we use these tools to encourage investment? Next slide, please, Krista. Brilliant, thank you. So I guess our next question was, how do we actually begin to assess ecosystem services opportunities? And we read through a lot of different studies that have been done, and you can do it in a number of different ways. But what we wanted to keep at the heart of this project was to try and keep the whole process as simple as what we can. So we decided actually, when you break it down, there's probably two determining factors that say whether you can improve a place and improve the ecosystem service. First of all, feasibility. So can you actually improve that land parcel? There's going to be some parcels of land that you're unable to improve, you're unable to change, say, for example, a road network. There's very little chance of that changing. And similarly, there might be some spaces that are actually achieving and performing really well. So there's little opportunity to improve them, but what they are doing right now is fantastic. So we need to safeguard those. So one element around feasibility, and then the second element is around need. So if we are going to make change, where is that change needed? So for example, if you had a fantastic town park that people access and the community uses, you don't necessarily want to go and build another town park directly next to it doing the same thing. You can also begin to look at social data as well, and begin to understand that actually if we made this change here, in terms of impacting society, it would have the greatest effect. So our whole approach was to look at feasibility and need across those parcels. Next slide, please. So once we had understood what the tool had to do and understood how we were going to assess it, we decided to determine what ecosystem services we were going to look at. So the tool that we've developed assesses water quality, water resources, amenity and health, carbon, leisure and recreation, biodiversity, food, and timber. The way we decided to approach the project was to look at each one of those ecosystem services in turn and take some time to think about the factors that would affect that ecosystem service. These factors we called attributes. So for example, in terms of water quality, there's a number of different factors that would affect water quality opportunities. That could be land connectivity, hydrological connectivity, slope, soil, land use, consented discharges. And each one of these individual elements, these attributes, we could score. Some of the images at the bottom of this slide show this in reality. So the first image there on the left is showing consented discharge points around watercourses. So we knew which land parcels had consented discharge points on them, and we could score them. The second image in the middle shows flow paths. So this is actually using LiDAR data to show where water would naturally accumulate if it was allowed to run and pool. And again, we could begin to score and assess those individual land parcels where that water was. Once we'd scored these individual attributes, we could then put them together and combine them into an overall ecosystem services score. And that's what the image on the right is showing there. That's a heat map to show the individual attributes all scored together to give you the overall water quality ecosystem service score. And then we could repeat this for every ecosystem service that we assessed. Next slide, please, Krista. So the assessment of each ecosystem service and attribute followed the same basic principle. Take some time to consider what's the best data out there for this. And there's hundreds of different data sets. That took time to look at what each individual data set could provide us with. Once we had that, we could then put that into a basic GIS model and run that process and then view what the outputs are. Refine the process, go back, run it again, and run it again. So that process took a long time to do as you beginning to look at different data, then looking at what the reality is. But what you begin to do once you've done that is then look at the scores and you begin to refine them. The output of that is that, and this is a little snapshot of the web map on the slide shown at the moment, is that for each of those 7 million land parcels that we talked about at the start, each had a score for every single attribute, every single factor that we were looking at, and every single ecosystem service. So the user could then go in, they could click on one of the tiles, the information would pop up, and they could see for every individual land parcel the score for an attribute, the score for the ecosystem service, or indeed actually the combined total score. And once we had that completed for every land parcel, we could then begin to create heat maps, which would show you where there was areas of high opportunity and areas where sites that were performing well needed to be safeguarded. And that you could cut that data and look at that either on a region, a local authority, a neighbourhood, or even across the whole of Greater Manchester. Next slide, please, Krista. So the next task we had was, okay, we've identified the areas now where we believe offer the greatest opportunity to improving ecosystem services, but could we stretch the tool a little bit further, and could we begin to actually suggest potential improvements that could be undertaken out on site from within the tool? We did this through going away and speaking to experts and project developers who actually implement these projects day in, day out physically on the ground. We spoke to them and begin to understand exactly what projects work and which projects could be directly linked to an ecosystem service. Once we had that, we created a matrix and then tied that to the land parcels that we've already scored. What we could then do is within the web map application, if you clicked on a parcel and you're interested in a specific ecosystem service, so water quality, air quality, etc., within the tool, you could hover over one of those ecosystem services, which is shown in that image there, and it would give you a suggested series of works that could be used to improve the ecosystem services in that area. And we did this again for all of land parcels across Greater Manchester. Next slide, please, Krista. So at that stage, we took a little bit of break and we thought, okay, well, I think it's important once we've scored all this, once we've made the tool, is to be very clear about what the tool is, and equally as important about what it isn't. So just to recap, what the tool is, it displays opportunities for improving ecosystem services. The improvements are based on two key principles: feasibility and need. We've scored every single master map parcel across Greater Manchester, and to do that, we've taken 40 different data sets and developed a scoring methodology for each one of those attributes. It was really important to us that we took a balanced approach. So each ecosystem service is scored on a balanced approach. So one ecosystem service isn't favored above another. And really the tool is used in its best element when it's used at a strategic application. So when you're looking across a wide area. But it's also important to note what it's not. So it's really important that people don't see it as an assessment of land quality. It's an assessment of the opportunity to improve it. Just because a site doesn't score favorably in terms of what can I do to improve here, it could be a really highly functioning site now. It certainly doesn't replace local knowledge, and that was something that we were really keen to get across to everyone. These tools always work best when they help guide, but they're always updated, always filtered by people who know the sites themselves and know the land themselves. It's not a definitive tool, so you can't just go on there, click on a parcel and go, right, I know what I'm doing now for the next 5 years. But it is an aid to decision making. It brings together all those data sets that we've talked about across such a wide area and helps you view and assess them. And it's certainly not standalone either. And again, we found it worked best when it was used in collaboration with other tools. Next slide, please, Krista. So that was probably the end of the sort of first stage of the project. The second was then, okay, now we've built this thing and we think it works really well. How do we actually go out there and get people using it get people understanding it, and get people using it on projects. So we decided to take not a one single approach to this, but divide it up and try and get as many people interested as we can. So first of all, we developed a lot of documentation and resources. So we had formal reports and things like that. But we also decided to use video guides, short sort of 7 to 10 minute video guides, which would go through the tool, explain how to use it, and explain a little bit of the background there. We developed tutorial guides as well in a kind of more formal way. So if people wanted to work through it at their own pace, that was there. But we also thought it was really important to go out and actually just talk to people, because we found that was the best way. Events like today and knowledge sharing we found were the most successful. So we developed a dissemination event. We invited leaders from Greater Manchester to come along and learn about the tool and see how they could use it. We promoted the tool for industry awards, which we were really happy that we received one from the Landscape Institute. And we also did one-to-one sessions, a bit like that image you can see on the slide there, actually going out with a laptop with the tool, speaking to individuals who know the projects, looking at a map and working out how this tool can help. But we also wanted to take it a little bit further. So we thought that actually working with some pilot projects to apply some of the learning and apply the tool would be a really good way to see if the tool works, first of all, and also refine and get feedback back into the tool's development. Next slide, please, Krista. So we decided to put out a call really for volunteers for projects to come forward to be involved in this. And we had 4 different projects that came forward. So we had a Bradshaw Brook master plan, which is a master plan for a brook, a really important one in Bolton. Northern Gateway in Manchester, which was a huge investment that was going on in the east of the city. The Crowle-Irwell Confluence Community Partnership, which is a group looking at how rivers and canals can connect and create a place for the community to go. And finally, Red Vales and Radcliffe Natural Flood Management, which was looking at more of the moorland in Greater Manchester. So 4 very different groups set up in very different sizes, looking at lots of different geography and scale. But we thought that was a really good way to test how the tool worked. And looking back at the project sort of a couple of years later, I think this was one of the critical bits, actually. This was really good that it allowed us to get involved with the pilots and begin to understand them. What we first did was help the pilots in terms of project development. So we took time to learn about what they were trying to do. Similarly, they took time with us to learn what the tool could do and help them. We made sure that we captured the lessons learned. So a fundamental part of this project was ensuring that the pilots could learn from themselves. So we created a pilot project forum where different representatives from each of the pilots could speak to each other and learn about what each other was doing. And we created a report which summarized that. And then finally, again, we made sure we went out and spoke to people. So we did a dissemination event where we asked each of the pilots to come forward and explain how the tools worked for them and what improvements could be made to the tool to help them in the future. And that was fed back into the development process. Next slide, please, Krista. So just really to round up, really, in terms of what the key learning points were from those pilots. So it was clear that this was a good tool for decision making. It could help. It was felt that tools like this are probably most beneficial at the start and the commencement of a project when a project is still being shaped. It was really handy and really useful for stakeholder engagement. So because it was a very visual tool, it engaged a lot more people than perhaps would have happened previously. And it also pulled in different stakeholders for those areas who, again, may not have realized the benefits of anyone else working on those projects. It highlighted that there was opportunities for all assets within the boundaries that they were looking at. It highlighted that the data that we generated could be used for funding applications, which is really critical for some of the smaller projects going forward. And it helped networking and collaborative approaches. So again, some of the organizations that were involved with the pilots are shown there on the right-hand side. So a real mix, and that was probably one of the most useful things to come out of it, that every single one of those organizations could use the tool in some way. Next slide, please, Krista. One of the further elements that we did to promote the tool and its usership was develop a user guide, this is the snapshot of the front page, which tried to summarize the whole project into sort of lightweight document. It looked at the what, the how, the who, and the resources. And critically, it tried to highlight why should you use this tool amongst all the others out there? Why is it important to look at this? And we felt that it deepens knowledge of natural capital and the natural capital approach, which is at the heart of the tool's development. It begins to understand and explain what ecosystem services are, which aren't always the most easiest thing for people to understand, but once they do, it's simple. It helps to show how you can develop projects and programs, how developments going forward can deliver net gain for the environment, and it provides a really useful tool for understanding what the evidence is about a site, so helping build that evidence base. Next slide, please, Krista. And this slide really just highlights the use cases that we found for the tool from going through all these pilots and going through all the testing. So we found strategic planners could use the tool to identify baseline for natural capital values and identify opportunities for environmental improvement. Land managers could particularly use the habitat mapping element and begin to understand how the practical applications of some of those suggestions for improving land could be used. Fundraisers could use this tool as well as the natural capital accounts to be able to put together quite useful bid applications, so they could identify, look, if we invest some money here, these are the improvements that we can find, and this is why it's needed. Local authority planners could use it again to help with the evidence, and so that could feed into development frameworks and planning policy. Friends of groups could use the tool to be able to engage with other people they didn't necessarily realize was using that place or space. And finally, developers could use the tool again to begin to understand the impact of their development going forward, and even more so actually begin to tailor the development, hopefully, to be able to improve some of these ecosystem services and natural capital. Next slide, please, Krista. And this really just summarizes some of the use cases that we found. So for a site or a neighborhood or a region, you could use the tool to go and see what is the greatest opportunity. If you were interested in one specific opportunity, you could go and find that. It could help you preserve those really highly functioning sites that need investment to look after them. It helps promote the 5 steps to natural capital, of which one of those critical steps is evidence and engagement, and this is where the tool comes into its own. Baselining and evidence building, so pulling all together all those data just into one place, so you don't have to go and read 50 reports and look at 40 different data sets and try them to get someone like me to put them into a map for you. It's all there for you already. The tool could help in terms of strategy and policy development, stakeholder engagement, and ultimately leading to delivering nature's recovery. Next slide, please, Krista. We just wanted to round off really with just three examples really of large-scale projects that have used this tool in slightly different ways. So the first one is the Oldham Development Framework and Local Plans. This is one of the 10 authorities that Krista showed on the diagram at the start. And here the ecosystem service maps help to formulate site-specific allocation. They were used to demonstrate the different types of activities and interventions that would be most beneficial to the council, so they could begin to tailor and focus where their investment needed to be. And it was really encouraging to hear that the council intended to use the ecosystem service maps going forward as well for other development frameworks and policies and strategies that they were going forward. So it wasn't just one hit. They could see it was a resource there that they could use for the future as well. Next slide, please, Krista. One of the projects that we finished just a couple of years ago was working with Manchester City Council on a really nice project that was focused on the river corridors within the city and developing sponge city thinking. The council had an ambitious target to be able to develop the river valleys and produce a strategy to encourage investment, particularly look at the Mersey, Medlock and Irk, which are the larger river valleys within the city, by 2030. Krista touched upon at the start there that some of the pressures that the whole of Greater Manchester, but as well as Manchester, are under with rapid population growth and a need to tackle climate change. And this strategy was picked up by one of the local members of Parliament who promoted it, which is really good to see. And there was a reference there as well to the tool that we developed. So that was a nice bit of promotion outside of the environmental community. Just last slide, please, Krista. And finally, this was another project we worked on with one of the river projects in Manchester, which was the IRC Vision. And we were involved, and the use of the tool was involved in the very early stages of this project. So the project was there trying to bring the IRC, the River IRC, into use by the community and encourage investment within it. And the tool was really useful. The very first stakeholder event that was done for the project, the web map was up there on the screen. People could zoom, they could look in, they could begin to understand the stretch of the river and also the habitats, but also what the opportunities were. So it was really nice that the very first step of the project, the tool was there to not tell you all the answers, but to aid that project development and decision making. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an overview of the tool, why we developed it, how we promoted it, how we've used it, and how it's gone on to be used for strategy. So yeah, I'll hand over back to Krista now.
Thanks, Mike. And just one last slide, really, just to just kind of provide an illustration of how all this links up around, we've covered, how this has been used in planning policy in terms of engagement and collaboration, working with a number of our different partners across Greater Manchester, and how we're looking at kind of bringing in other types of funding based on who we understand benefits from nature and actually where we can deliver most impact in terms of uplifting ecosystem services and improve those services that nature provides to society. And I mentioned before that in Greater Manchester we're producing a local nature recovery strategy, which is part of the National Nature Recovery Network. And going forward, whilst we're producing a plan that's looking at opportunities and areas where we're protecting nature, we also need to understand, actually, once we've got this nature recovery strategy, how do we implement it? How do we look at starting to bring forward opportunities in that plan and actually starting to engage with landowners, developers, and community groups and other organisations that are looking to deliver projects for the natural environment? And the ecosystem services opportunity mapping will provide a really important evidence base for that, because again, once we have our strategy and we know where we're looking at to improve, we can start using some of the mapping that we've had previously to really kind of look at some of the hotspots around Greater Manchester as to where potentially some of those projects are most needed. So again, it doesn't just stop at the projects we've been doing. We have that evidence base. And yes, we do need to kind of update it and kind of keep those, those data sets updated. But, for our purposes, understanding perhaps where some of those hotspots are and where some of the priorities that we should be focusing on, where we should be delivering some of these key nature restoration projects and how we should be delivering is absolutely vital, because we can't do everything everywhere. So where do we start? Where do we kind of go, well, actually, we've got some projects that we know are really, really important. And actually, where should we, which ones should we focus on? So I think going forward, again, using the ecosystem service opportunity mapping and the natural capital accounts, will absolutely be fundamental to delivering on our nature recovery strategy. And the last slide, I've just included some links there. Obviously, we can, share the slides, but effectively, it's all the type of work that we've been doing that we've mentioned in our slides, whether that's through the Natural Course Project, Biodiversity Net Gain, the Local Nature Recovery Strategy, our Natural Capital, but also lastly, our Ignition Project. So yeah, that's it. That's our contact details, and I shall stop sharing. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hola, buenas tardes. Como ambientalista que intentó justificar y cuadrar los presupuestos con economistas como María, mi pregunta va vinculada, pues, ¿cuáles son los principales desafíos e inconvenientes para financiar las actuaciones relacionadas con la restauración ambiental? Y si han tenido alguna solución estrella. ¿Vale?
Hello, is that a question? We haven't had an interpretation, so is someone able to interpret, please?
I think the gentleman was asking Krista. I picked it up a little bit in terms of the translation, was around around investment opportunities, whether there was something, whether there was any magic bullet to that, I guess, in terms of encouraging investment in there, and was there any useful things that people could pick up in terms of how do you encourage that investment to come into the sites?
So I think, in terms of investment, there's lots of important strategies that have come out, particularly the green investment strategy that the government have published. And I think from our perspective is, when we're looking at investment, we need to understand what are the different types of financial models that provide services to people that actually they want to buy, and that's the key thing in terms of this. How do you tailor a package of things that people will want to buy, and then you can pay back the investor, because ultimately the investor is looking for a payback on their money that they're investing into, whether that's slow the flow flooding initiatives, whether or not that's kind of improvements to our parks and green spaces. If there is someone that is paying money to invest in them, then they want a payment back. So the important thing about this is, how do you start developing innovative finance models that you have a product that people want to buy? So that could be you are investing in slow the flow flooding, where you're putting in leaky dams, you're putting in kind of trees to help slow flooding and reduce the rate of flooding, or the amount of water that is impacting on an area. If that area is made up of businesses, would they be willing to pay back on that product and actually reduce the risk to them from flooding?
I don't know if I'm actually being heard. I don't know if
Yes.
I can. Yeah. All right then. So, well, guys, first and foremost, let me please congratulate you both for this presentation. I consider it has been really interesting. The questions that I had were regarding private investment. While you were showing the timeline, Krista, I got from you that it was quite hard to get some private investment. Why would you say that there hasn't been any private investment so far? And the second question regarding private investment as well, is basically which sectors would you focus more on obtaining their funding? I mean, by focusing more, I mean,
oh, you've just cut off at the end of there in terms of sectors, but I can come on to the first part there. Why is it hard to get private investment? I think the main reason it's hard is because it hasn't really been done before in the natural environment. And, you know, we've seen the renewable sector grow over the past 10, 15 years. We've seen the waste sector and composting grow, and part of that needs some form of government intervention or help to help build those business models. And actually, how do they take it to market? What are the incentives for, you know, the market to invest, but also in terms of the products? So an example we've got in the UK is biodiversity net gain. So the government have put in a fiscal tax on developers. And what's that saying is every developer that's building a new development, if they are displacing habitats or green space, they need to replace that and 10% more. And they can do that on site. So they have their site area and they can, you know, accommodate the replacement of that lost habitat on their site. And that's the top of the mitigation hierarchy. They should always look at minimizing the damage. If they can't do that, minimizing, find somewhere else on site to replace that. If not, go off site. And that's where the market comes in here, because there are now markets, you know, there's a market demand for biodiversity net gain units that developers, if they can't do this on site, which is quite challenging for some developers, particularly in dense urban areas, that actually they need to buy off-site units. And therefore, the government has helped to create a market there, because you now have habitat bank developers that are coming forward with big, large nature restoration projects that they can sell units, biodiversity net gain units, back to developers. But that's taken a long time to develop, and where it came in, it was a mandatory requirement. So all developers have to do this. It came in February, and we're starting to see the market, but it's very, very slow, and it's a quite an immature market. So, you know, actually kind of verifying those units and making sure that actually they're going to deliver what the Habitat Bank developers say they're going to deliver. There's still quite a bit of risk in terms of investors investing in those big projects that actually they're going to get paid back by it, because we haven't seen how the market works yet. We've only seen a small number of Habitat Bank proposals coming forward. So it's about the image, you know, the kind of the maturity of the market. It's still not very mature. So, you know, we're still testing and seeing these kind of, you know, natural environment projects come to market. And actually, once, you know, kind of buyers actually have confidence that actually they can buy a biodiversity net gain unit, it will help them deliver their off-site requirements, and it does what it says it does, then I think investors will become a lot more confident that they'll get their money back from selling those units. But at the moment, it's still quite an immature market. But what I would say is the different sectors. So I would say it's biodiversity net gain, so biodiversity sector, selling those development units. It's carbon in terms of carbon sequestration and you know, kind of selling carbon credits. So corporates, you know, can offset their emissions by buying carbon credits. Again, there's a market there. But also, you know, slow the flow, sustainable urban drainage. But again, reducing flooding in terms of that sector is still quite difficult to prove in terms of corporates buying a product that's going to help reduce the risk of flooding? Who knows? It's nature. Nature works in lots of different ways, and sometimes nature can be quite unpredictable. So until we have proven financial, kind of models that actually the market has confidence in, it's going to take a long time. Mike, I don't know whether you want to add to that.
Yeah, I just add to that. I mean, they're the key areas: biodiversity net gain and carbon and water. But also, there's probably another element to water in terms of water resource scarcity as well. That we're even not necessarily a problem for Greater Manchester, because Greater Manchester gets its fair share of rain, which is fine, which has got the opposite problem. But in England, particularly down in the southeast, southwest, there's a scarcity of water there. And looking ahead in terms of recreational opportunities, private investment, golf courses, cricket, horse riding, those type of events, there isn't the water there long term to be able to provide those. I guess going back to the heart of the question is what promotes investment? Well, the market does, and that will always be the case. And so a scarcity, a resource that is depleting, will drive market forces, and there is a value to that. So I think for me, what these tools do and where natural capital fits in so nicely is it's a very simple concept that people can understand, but probably for the first time it applies a monetary value to what nature and the environment provides, and it's one that is quantifiable. So probably for the first time, nature and the environment suddenly is alongside other economic factors, and I don't think that's probably ever happened previously. So it's harder to ignore and avoid, I would suggest.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that is, we are starting to see, kind of additional requirements for corporates and businesses, like the nature risk disclosures, environmental social governance requirements at an international level that are really starting to press on corporates and businesses that actually, in terms of their reporting, in terms of their investments, they are starting to have to embed nature into those investments. And so therefore that's putting a pressing need onto where they buy those from. I think the key thing is at the moment is because the market is still quite immature, we're still looking at impact investors, those investors that don't want a really high rate of return in comparison to mainstream investors, like your pension funds, like AXA, that are looking at 8 to 12% return on investment. At the moment, we're still looking at some of those impact investors that are looking at 5 or 6% because, actually they're interested in getting some money back, but they also they're interested in the benefits that these projects provide as well. So, we're starting to move across the spectrum of investors, but to get to those mainstream ones, that's still going to be quite a challenge.